Serl.
We'll just walk down here. There we go. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
And happy Easter Sunday. I was thinking about what we say about happy Easter Sunday. I guess that's what we say. Merry Christmas, that kind of slips through a bit, but somehow we don't kind of get that happy Easter. Anyway, I hope it's wonderful for all you think that Easter is supposed to be good for. And at this time, I'd like to kind of just think in a global perspective for a moment, to realize that it essentially, what we're doing here, and I'll chat a little bit about it, essentially it as we kind of experience it, it came through Christianity. And on this planet, around this time, and probably in most of the countries around the world, there are over 1 billion people who would be celebrating or acknowledging or in some way experiencing this Easter experience. So just think for a minute, just imagine how that reflects. What would be the consciousness that's around the world right now in this Easter consciousness? And I guess I just ask you to do that, and maybe just to formulate a bit of an idea as to what your consciousness of Easter is. Anyway, sometimes we come and we say Happy Easter, Merry Christmas, or whatever, and we then tend to just see our own circumstance, but perhaps we forget that this is a community of global proportion. And I guess that's what Science of Mind is all about. Remembering that each individual is a key to this whole movement. And while I mention about other people, there's a couple of centers right now that are undergoing a little bit of a change. I suppose that's appropriate to talk about that at Easter time. One is Reverend Dr. Pat, who is in Temecula, California, and she's moving to the center in Calgary. So today, as we speak, Pacific Daylight Saving Time, she is probably doing her last service. I'm not sure how long she's been there. 17 years, not 70, but 17, okay. Just had a little palpitation here. Anyway, she's moving to Calgary, to the center there, which is a big deal. And Reverend Pat got an email, and then also a day or so ago, she heard that the minister, Reverend Cam, who is in Winnipeg, is leaving the center there and taking some time off. And that was where Reverend Pat was. So maybe we can just keep those two individuals specifically in our thoughts as we kind of approach this Easter of renewal. And I guess that's about change. Now, I'll talk about, as you can see there, they had a little difficulty. It's such a long title, it kind of went on for several pages here. But I guess that's the whole issue of Easter. And I'm going to talk, I have to get to some history to give you a little bit of background, but what I hope to end up today is to talk about, if you like, rebirth, renewal, transformation, and change. Surprise, surprise. I hear that's about life, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm going. And Lana did do the request for these, if you can do those. Also, you should have this piece of paper somewhere close by, because I'm going to invite you in a moment to help out with that. So this aspect that I'm going to talk about today, spring equinox, Easter, and the festival of rebirth, the words are essentially from the pagan religions. To my knowledge, we don't tend to use those sorts of words. I guess the one at the end there, Festival of Rebirth, is not in the terminology of science of mind. And I'll mention that a little bit later. But if we can kind of just accept those three terms, they are extremely interwoven. But I'll talk about that a little bit later too. So the bigger idea though here for March is the theme of growth. And even bigger than that, what we're talking about is the evolution of humanity. And this occasion where we come together and celebrate these occasions of change, whether it be Christmas, Easter, Groundhog Day, no, not that. I guess that would be carrying a little bit too far. But these occasions of largeness are really events in our lives, in our experiences, that really point us to some significant spiritual truths, which is, I think, kind of neat. Now, another thing that I think really neat, and I hope you agree with me, because I'm going to ask your help on this, I've been reading the 365 book, probably for 5 years. I guess that's how long I've been here. And one of my knockout favorites is the one that you have here. And it comes from May the 12th, and I thought that was close enough to today that I could use it. Actually, it really talks exactly to what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to invite you to help me read it, which is a little unusual, but I decided to be a little unusual because I don't want to just read it. I want you to kind of experience it yourself. And we'll just do it. We'll come back to it near the end, and I know our consciousness will shift. But there are some moments in here that I would really like you to note. So if you wouldn't mind, those of you who choose to, shall we just read this? It takes a couple minutes, and we'll kind of just set that as our focus. As I attune myself to the perfection of God, it flows through me. It dissipates all the obstructions of my everyday life, transforming all confusion into love and beauty. I realize I must bring this perfection of reality into expression, for the mind and heart of each human being are the only channels God has through which to manifest God's infinite mind and perfect love, which must be expressed continually, that life may evolve in greater and greater perfection. As I permit this reality to be expressed in me and through me, I am joyful in the assurance that I am bringing into being that much more of God's perfection. I am transforming a part of life, just as nature passes through the beautiful transformation called spring. I know I need only to realize the true state of being, which is love, that which I really am, to transform all that appears to be imperfect. Love is that which is real, complete harmony. Love is the great harmonizing agency. I stand firm on the rock of reality, knowing all is well, knowing that there is but one, and that one is love. Yeah, I did get bumps. Anybody else? Anyway, it just talked to me. The thing that really, when I was kind of thinking about what I would say, I guess the big deal for me is there about each human being. Right? It's you, me, each human being. So this thing called humanity and growth and evolution, this thing is not really about global stuff. Yes, that's part of it. But this thing called evolution and growth, spiritual reality, this is mano on mano. This is person by person. This is each individual. And of course, as we take the collective, yes, But the thing about the story about Easter is, regardless of how we kind of lump people together as this group or that group, really this whole progression from maybe lower consciousness to higher consciousness, it's all about individual human beings relating to God and relating to themselves. Divine nature and oneness with God. Sorry, but that's all this is about, right? It's about us dealing with or learning about our divine nature and us about being one with God. That really is about it. And that's all that we've been doing all the time we've kind of been on this plane. For us to realize what the heck we're doing here, and how do I relate to this body and that body and all that stuff, and our vision changing to see through that form and know the truth. So that's kind of where we're going. So in kind of a backhanded way, I want to start with spring equinox. Now, we're still experiencing spring equinox. I think it was March the 20th, and it was on the calendar. You can see that. Does anybody go out in the ground and put their hands in the ground on March the 20th? I'm being serious. There are some serious gardeners here, I want you to know. Well, at a time before writing, people still knew when we passed from winter to spring. And they knew about light, and they had a predictability about that, well, okay, yes, we've moved on in this season, and we're approaching this season, and there was a readiness about it, and they knew about dead seasons, and they knew about renewal. They knew what spring would mean, and transformation and change and all that stuff. It may not have been written down, but they did it by word of mouth, by myth, passing on around campfires. So they definitely celebrated the transition, the passage, which we talked about here. The beautiful transformation called spring. So spring really is a very important time for us to go and grow the food that's going to keep us alive, as well as the deeper meaning, which is all about us, right? Enriching and embracing ourselves. So, spring equinox was a foundation with what I'm going to call primal religions. And primal religions were the spiritual consciousness for, if you like, millions of years. Before we got into the relatively new stuff called Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, all that stuff is just a blink of an eye compared to this huge expanse of time when mankind kind of didn't see themselves as being different than life. They just kind of lived life. And one of the significant places of being aware of that life being was in springtime. And that was the celebration. So they did know. They had an awareness of the movement of the sun and lunar. I wasn't there, but this is what some of my friends have told me. But they knew, and they knew it was consistent, and they lived it, and it was a big deal for them. And there were people at that time who had the larger idea. There always are. I'm not sure who they were, but I know that they were there. They were human beings exactly like ourselves. They were spiritual beings here to experience appearances. And that was 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, whatever. And their consciousness was whatever it was back there. But there were these people who had a more enlightened consciousness. There always are. They might be called a shaman, they might be called this or whatever. But you understand that typically, though, we're talking about humanity as kind of a grouping. So there was this time when people, they didn't have all the words and the awareness that we have now grown to because we are standing on their shoulders, successive generations. So The idea about spring equinox is, though, that it happens exactly the same time every year. And there were celebrations that were established at that time. And these went on for thousands of years. And they were celebrating the renewal that they could go back into the earth and grow the food that would feed them. So they were aware of cycles, they were aware of circulation, they were aware of all of that. They could see that life moves through the dirt. They could see that life moves through the trees and the grass and all of that. And probably they didn't necessarily marvel at it because it was just their circumstance. And with us, I'm just thinking, just a little aside, I know I've kind of grown a little bit away from that. I don't put my hands in the dirt that much. And I don't necessarily hear all the birds and whatever happening and say, ooh, that's lovely. I seem to kind of find, I'm coming to the center, I've got a book to read or whatever. So in a way, I really value deeply the harmony in which primal human beings related to the earth and honored the earth. So, spring equinox, it was celebrated around the time in which Christianity started to happen. This was approximately 2,000 years ago. And I guess, to be fair, I need to say that I'm not out to make anybody wrong or whatever. But Christianity started to grow and expand. And let's call it, I don't know, I need a little bit of help here, maybe from Reverend Pat. But anyway, I'm going to call it perhaps a higher consciousness religion. We're getting, I think, probably more into our head and a little bit away from our heart. The primal religions, I think, were kind of heart-based. And as we're kind of moving along and we get kind of the intellect is starting to play a little bit more of a role here. But as Christianity started to grow, as man started to evolve, and consciousness was moving up, of course, we're having a little bit of a bumping into each other. And there will be groups that were primal in their outlook, and then there would be Christian people coming through and wanting to do the C word to them, like convert them. And obviously, this is a process that's still going on today. There are people on this planet who are primally oriented, and we're bumping up to them all the time. Sometimes that bumping up is pretty ugly. Sometimes it happens like it has happened with the spring equinox. And it happened that Christianity, this is based on what I understand. I think it's fairly accurate. I don't claim to be an expert. But I understand that Christianity might move through. There was an occasion of spring equinox. Already there were stories of resurrection and virgin birth that had been circulating in the European Mediterranean area. So already the foundations of what we would call Jesus, origins, beginning, sort of adult life and resurrection, crucifixion, resurrection, already those things were established in many cultures of the world. Now, if you were a Christian person wanting to kind of influence things, in this case, maybe you would want to kind of piggyback on it, saying, okay, you guys celebrate on the 20th of March, the 21st of March, whatever, spring equinox. And I know you already call it Easter, which has probably come from the Frankish people or some Northern European people. They had these terms already. We're going to just lay over this idea about Jesus. And so essentially, this stories that Lana was talking about, these stories are subject to a little bit of change. So our Christian honoring, perhaps, is the result of pagan roots, which we have kind of co-opted. And that doesn't make them worse, better, whatever. It's just the way it is. But that's where our roots are, which is a pretty good place. Our roots are still in the dirt. We sometimes lose track of that. But the terms, though, spring equinox and Easter, and now the festival of rebirth, because science of mind does not we don't have the consciousness of rebirth because we're deathless. We're birthless, we're deathless. This is why I said what I did. These terms are more from sort of the primal roots of us. And I'll get into a little bit more fairly soon, because I better move on. But this is where the aspect of a festival of rebirth comes from. So just, I hope I've kind of explained, these are roots. These are our ancestors. This is where some of our consciousness is grounded. And so we've come through here, and we are where we are. And where are we? Well, you're right here in Science of Mind. And I honor you for that. Because this process of evolution, as we have been told, is about each human being. It's not about 4,000 people there. It's about one human being interacting with the divinity. And then you take the collective, but it is about one human being at a time. One soul at a time. We sang to that. So that's kind of where we are. We're not talking about rebirth, please, but we sure are talking about change, transformation, renewal, help me out, all sorts of stuff, right? So we may not say rebirth, and that is a significant difference because of our very firm belief, our universal idea that life is infinite, that it is birthless, deathless, changeless, and all that stuff, and that's all on the inside. So that's a big demarcation there, a big whoops or something that's different. So this is an aspect of rebirth. I'm going to call it renewal, I suppose. I'm sure everyone here has had an experience, however big. You've had a moment or so in life that has kind of, we might call it an awakening, whether it's pleasant or not. Anybody? Yeah? Probably an idea. Yeah. And we might call it a dark night of the soul. And we might call it a bolt of lightning. We might call it, we call all these things, for our language is kind of a little limited to explain the huge thing that's happened inside us, this huge renewal, and we've got to put it into human words, and our words fail us. But we have things like rebirth, renewal, transformation, change, circumstances like depression. We put labels on these things that have happened to us. So what does it end up being? Well, I guess the feeling that you get in these moments in which this transformation is happening, these moments can be quite dark. And I guess that darkness of the soul time, at the time we didn't really know what was happening to us. And it sure didn't feel very good. Let's flash forward, perhaps, to the crucifixion time and the resurrection time. So we had a circumstance with a man who was an activist, and he was in trouble with the authorities, and he was paraded. He was forced to walk through what is called Via Doloroso, which is, I guess it's the street of pain or grief or something like that, carrying his cross. Now, I didn't carry a cross, but maybe some of you have had moments where it felt like you were carrying your cross, right? And there was a lot of darkness. Now, if you look from a metaphysical point of view, we had this person who was walking on this road. It was rough. He was surrounded. He was enslaved. He was poked and prodded. He was confined. He was in chains. All of that. And so we're talking about our own personal experience of that in a symbolic way. Now, from my point of view, looking at this individual who was quite enlightened, he already knew what was going to happen. but he went away. He went ahead and he did it. But so he had brought that, and we have brought that into our own experience for us to get bigger. At the time, if you had said, "No, this is going to be good for you," you know what you would have done, right? Forget it. However, on reflection and you sitting here, you probably all have experienced more than just one occasion. And the thing with Jesus and being, absolutely chained and under, suffering, I guess the suffering appeared worse than it actually was. Because he was in a consciousness of significant elevation. But still, the moment of arriving with your cross, the moment of being put up, and then the death circumstance. All of us are here, so none of us have experienced the real life death circumstance, at least I hope not. But in the symbolic way, we all have been in that place of death to some extent. And which means probably that we have been pointed